This time will be on living sustainably, walking the greener side of business. And we have three speakers for this session. Firstly, Mr. Dixon, Director of Environmental Investments, YTL Corporation Berhad, Malaysia. Also, Mariam Foudery, Senior Vice President, Marketing, Communications and Corporate Social Responsibility, Agility, State of Kuwait. And Nana Firman, Initiator of Eco-Fab Living, Republic of Indonesia. And moderating this session is Brother Ibrahim Abdul Matin, Environmental Policy Consultant and author from the United States of America. Since they are all up there, I hand over the floor to Mr. Ibrahim Abdul Matin.
Is this on? Okay, bismillah. So if we can ask, if folks could come up towards the front, inshallah, please, don't be shy. I'm going to say it again. Please come up to the front, inshallah, just because there's not a lot of people in here. It would be nice to have a more intimate conversation, inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. My name is Ibrahim Abdul Matin. I want to thank you for being here. You could be anywhere else in the world, literally, but we're honored to have your presence. We're going to hear from three people who are experts and also who are going to learn from each other and also learn from you, God willing. This session is talking about the greener side of business. In the earlier session today, a brother named Mariam said that in the government panel, he spoke about the 20th century was about big ideas. Hold on real quick before I keep going. Is anybody paying attention? I want to hear yes or no. Are you paying attention? All right, good. So he said that the 20th century was a century of big ideas. And he said that this century is going to be one of three things. And I'm going to add a third, but I like this, and I want you guys to think about these as we discuss. That this century is also the century of big data, of small gadgets, and people in the streets. I want to add that this is also the century where we clean up some of the messes that we made in the 20th century. And that we start to address some of those challenges. As a Muslim and as Muslims in the world, we have the blessing of our prophetic tradition, and that's what I want you guys to think about as we talk about things today. The prophetic tradition challenges us to leave the earth better than we found it, and to be engaged and active in our communities. So we're going to have a discussion today that's going to focus on greening your business, but really it's going to be very tactical, hopefully, as well as we're going to give some stories and some examples, and we hope to not waste your time, inshallah. So I also want to encourage you, if you do have questions, when we get to the point of questions, to not make it into a big comment, ask a question. And if you're going to repeat yourself, then don't ask the question. Does that make sense? Sorry, I'm from New York. I can be a jerk sometimes. Just by way of my background briefly, I am the author of a book called Green Deen, What Islam Teaches About Protecting the Planet. If you didn't buy it yet, then go on your iPhone right now and buy it. I'm just joking. And I'm also a former policy advisor in the New York City Mayor's office. I worked on issues of sustainability and infrastructure policy, just to give you that background. So we're going to begin, and I want to start with you, Ralph, if you don't mind. Ralph Dixon is the Director of Environmental Investment at YTL Corporation, and they're a global utility conglomerate, and they work in power, water, construction, hotels, real estate. They do big things. So as we continue in this conversation, we're going to talk about logistics, we're going to talk about construction, we're going to talk about products, we're going to talk about stakeholders, but I really want you to sort of set the stage from your perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give people a round of applause when they begin. Ralph Dixon, everyone.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon, and I suppose one of the analogies that I like that somebody made a while back was about when you want to get fruit from a tree. I think we're a lot of Malaysians here today, so you all know about rambutans. When you want to harvest rambutans, which are plentiful and very high up in the tree, you don't cut the tree down to get the fruit. There are sustainable ways of harvesting fruit, and certainly cutting the tree down isn't one of them. And that alludes to a lot more practices that go on in business and certainly relate to also things that we do in YTL. And it's not about cutting down the tree so much as doing it sustainably. So you cut down one tree, you plant another 5. The interesting thing is that today I think I've heard mostly from speakers of Islam faith. So I'm one of the minorities here. But one thing we all have in common is that we all recognize the devil. So nearly every religion in the world features the devil. So my boss, Tansri Francis Yo, he often refers to doing a deal with the devil, or what he calls a Faustian bargain. And that's what it is when one cuts a tree down to get the fruit. It is a Faustian bargain. There's basically no justification for that. So in exploring the challenges, the balances, and the other issues in stakeholders and sustainability issues, obviously we have to consider a balance of all the stakeholder interests and all the sustainability interests as well. I don't know if many of you saw or heard Amar speak earlier from Travel Eyes, and he said he would rather be blind than short-sighted, which I thought was a really nice little phrase, and I'm sure that will become a catchphrase attributed to him. Just showing you the plethora of sustainability issues. It's not just people, planet, and profits, or ESG, or triple bottom line. There's economic, there's community, environment, health and safety, corporate governance, and the list actually goes on. So when we talk about sustainability, there's actually many issues within the whole sustainability framework, many pillars supporting sustainable business. But at the end of the day, every single one of those pillars has to be resulting in an economic sustainability as well. So it's the balancer of the stakeholder interests. And as you can see, there's just a few of the stakeholders I put there. Governments, employees, shareholders, directors, NGOs, communities. There's a lot of vested interests. But the main thing about the environment side, so how do we walk the greener side of business, is we need to firstly measure. Without having a baseline established and knowing where we are, we don't know where we are going to go or how we're going to get there. So measuring where we are is a key part of how we actually establish the baseline in our businesses. Managing is obviously the next result of the business in terms of we've measured, then we can decide on the management strategy, the roadmap, the sustainability path. And finally, what we should all be doing is become very transparent. So we should report. So we measure, we manage, and then we report. We become extremely, as I once said to our leaders in YTL, painfully transparent. We want to have it as a painful process that we have to reveal facts and issues about ourselves. So the stakeholder interests, YTL produces a lot of carbon emissions from the cement, the power, and the water side. So environment has become one of our key areas that we focus on. And you can see these are just a few of our initiatives. Blended cement. So as I say, cutting down a tree to get the fruit, cutting down limestone to make cement. But what we do there is we blend the cement, so we get Portland cement from the limestone, but we cut down the limestone sustainably. So we use fly ash from coal-fired power plants. We use blast furnace slag from steel, copper slag. We use raw limestone and gypsum. And all these are waste products that go into the blended cement. So now we have an aggregate of about 50% of our cement is blended. So sustainably cutting down a tree, that's really what it's all about. Again, how do we get to the point where we can strategize? We map out. After we've mapped, we identify the areas that we can focus on. Then we evaluate the intangible benefits as well as the tangible benefits. And then we go on to look at what is the additional revenue stream? Is it a sustainable activity in itself? And then obviously we go through the project implementation. And again, the monitoring is a key part of that. So Monitoring is part of the measuring. It's a continuous process. One should do it, if not every 6 months, every 3 months, every quarter. Anyway, I think my time is almost up, but I'd just like to leave you with a slide which I like from Calvin and Hobbes. For those of you on the translators, sometimes I think the surest sign that intelligent life exists elsewhere in the universe is that none of it has tried to contact us. Is this really our future? Is this really where we are now? Let's hope we can make a change. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we're going to have a woman who's not only a leader in business, Mariam Foudery, Vice President of Communication Marketing at Corporate Social Responsibility at Agility from Kuwait, but she's also a mother, and she brings her child with her on her adventures around the globe. Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I always have to readjust the microphones because I'm significantly smaller than everybody else that speaks. What I thought I'd talk about today is how you create business value for issues of sustainability. And I guess the main message that I want to get across, it may not be a popular or an idealistic one, but I think it's a very practical one, and it's this, that passion about doing the right thing, belief and values are important, very important, especially in the senior levels of any company that thinks about anything, right? Whether it's business or government or otherwise. But very often in business, that passion, that belief, those values are not enough. So good intentions are not enough when it comes to greening businesses and thinking about sustainability issues. And what I want to talk about is how you create some dollar value as well as goodwill when you think about greening business. So I just want to give you a very quick background on the company that I work for, Agility, because it grounds how I think about some of these issues and the examples that I'm going to give. Very quickly, we're the 8th largest logistics and transportation company in the world. The company began in Kuwait in 1979, and it grew to be the largest logistics provider in the Middle East. And then it began a period of global acquisitions. So we acquired 47 different companies around the world, and today we operate in 100 countries, have about 22,000 employees, and $4.8 billion in revenue. And we're not owners of transportation assets. So we don't own, for the most part, ships or planes, and in many countries we don't own trucks either. What we do is we act as the middleman. So if somebody wants to, let's say you're a big business or a small business and you want to move your cargo from one part of the world to another, you come to us and we take care of it for you. We book it on the ships, the planes, and so on, owned by others. So we manage the supply chain. Now, what makes Agility different from the other 9 top 10 logistics players in the world is that our roots are in emerging markets. We're the only company that has a background outside of Western Europe or the United States, and our investments are very heavy in emerging markets. So the world that we see and the world that we operate in is perhaps a little bit different from the world of some of our major competitors. And that has implications for sustainability issues. So what I want to talk about today is a little bit about how emerging markets, which many of the large Muslim communities in the world do live in emerging markets, what's different when it comes to sustainability issues. First of all, the regulatory environment is very different. So each country is different, but for the most part, you don't have the same level of environmental regulations in most emerging markets as you do in, let's say, Western Europe. Your customers and the preferences of your customers also tend to be different. Now again, if you look at the private sector in almost any emerging markets, you'll see that 2/3 are made of small and medium enterprises. And if you look at Agility's portfolio, small and medium enterprises make up a large part of our business. And I can tell you very honestly that small and medium enterprises are still focused on cost first and foremost. They are not asking questions about sustainability in their procurement process. They are not making purchasing decisions on the basis of sustainability. The infrastructure is very different. So if I look at a major competitor like DHL Logistics, for example, they're doing very interesting things related to using biofuels and alternative fuel technologies in places like Germany. But if you're a company like Agility with heavy operational presence in a part of the world like the Middle East, a conversation about biofuels isn't even part of the conversation, right? The infrastructure is just not there to have those sorts of discussions. So the sustainability issues, the core issues, why sustainability matters is not different, but how the sustainability landscape plays out is very different. And yet the risks to business in emerging markets are very, very high. So if you look at Thailand, just as a recent example, the devastating flood in Thailand jeopardized a lot of business activity. For example, I don't know if you know this, but some of the world's leading makers of hard drives are based out of Thailand. That's where the manufacturing hub for hard drives is. And when the Thailand floods happened, the disruption to the supply chain in Thailand jeopardized big technology businesses that are global in nature. So there's this mismatch, if you like, of a sustainability landscape that isn't necessarily focusing on these issues, and yet the direct risk to businesses and people are actually higher in emerging markets. So how do you reconcile or bridge that gap from a business perspective? And I believe that the key is really to find ways to create, to communicate, and to build demand for both financial and environmental value. So these two things cannot be decoupled, in my opinion. In other words, part of the challenge for businesses is to help people quantify the financial savings that come from environmental initiatives. So if you're dealing with a customer that doesn't necessarily care about making the supply chain more environmentally friendly, you will do what they do care about, which is put together a more efficient supply chain that reduces their costs significantly. But in the process, you can also talk about the environmental implications and benefits. And once that link is made in people's minds, it's very hard. People don't go back. And so part of the challenge is sort of creating demand for something that people don't even know that they want yet. And I just want to give you two quick examples because I think they illustrate this point. From a customer perspective, we worked with a global telecommunications company. It's actually Nokia, so this is not a secret. But they have factories in China and India, and they move air freight from China and India to all over the world. Equipment, they're moving telecommunications equipment, and we worked with them on a project to consolidate goods in transit. So what we did is we took all of the standard, the cargo came in on standard air pallets, and we unpacked them and then repacked them more densely on special air pallets that where you can fit more cargo into the plane. And what this does is it reduces the transportation costs because you're taking out a lot of the packaging. It means that you're reducing dead space in the airplanes, which means that fewer trips need to be flown. And all of this results in very significant bottom line benefits for Nokia. But it also results in very significant environmental savings to the tune of 6 to 9% reductions in emissions. And just to give you a sense of scale, in the first year we moved 1 million kilograms of air freight for Nokia. So a 6 to 9% reduction in emissions is significant. And those two things and how we communicate both with our customer and publicly about those two things couples those issues, cost savings and environmental savings. And just an internal example from within Agility, our largest operations are in Kuwait. And we have the equivalent of, more than several city blocks worth of warehousing space in Kuwait. And in Kuwait, electricity is dirt cheap. It's the second most heavily subsidized electricity in the world. So we tend to use it very, very freely. You don't really think about the cost of electricity because it's not a major line item in your budget. But that said, because so many people use electricity so freely in Kuwait, there were actually brownouts in the grid. And the Kuwaiti government came to us and they said, listen, Agility, we need your help. You guys need to reduce your electricity consumption. And so we set up a project, and our goal was to reduce electricity consumption by 20%, and we managed to reduce electricity consumption by 25% over the course of a year. And by the way, that's not a good sign. If you can reduce your electricity consumption by 25%, what it tells you is that you're very inefficient to start with. So I'm not patting myself on the back here. But we realized that not only by doing this, we saved the equivalent electricity use from 823 homes for an entire year, but we saved a significant amount of money to the tune of many hundreds of thousands of dollars, even in the heavily subsidized environment that is Kuwait. And that made people really sit up and listen. So we did it because we had to. We did it because the government asked us to. And then all of a sudden, it took on legs of its own because not only was it relatively easy to do and relatively easy to sustain, but wow, it saved us a lot of money in the process. So that's my takeaway, that going green in the context of emerging markets in particular often means creating demand for things that people don't know they want yet, by really focusing on financial as well as environmental benefits and value. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So just as we're going to move forward right now, the next speaker is Nana Firman, and she comes from Indonesia, so she's local gal, regionally local. But I think we're going to shift a little bit and start to think, and Nana's going to share a little bit about the human behavior. How do we shift human behavior? And Nana's going to help us think about that a little bit. So give her a round of applause.
Assalamualaikum. Maybe everybody's looking at the bio that I call myself as an initiator of Eco-Fab Living, which is a social campaign to increase public awareness by presenting current ecological and climate crisis, while at the same time advocating sustainability for a better future through citizen involvement. So I just want to address a little bit that why we are actually talking about living sustainably. My colleague Mariam and Ralph already addressed about what's going on in the business world, but I want to touch a little bit about what's going on globally. What is our global sustainability challenges at the moment? We see a lot of lost ecosystem services to natural degradation, and also climate crisis is reality. I think everybody agree with that. You can be a denier of climate change, but it's happening. Just last month, Ibrahim lived in New York, and he's one of the victims of the storm. And also biodiversity loss. Ralph touched about this also, about resources. And then also we have a challenge of population growth. Right now we are 7 billion. In the future we are going to grow more, but the natural resources is the same amount. And also we have this issue of poverty and inequality to access to resources, including natural resources. And yesterday, the Prime Minister of Malaysia actually talking about that also, about the developed and developing countries, the inequality of that. And also, looking at all those lists, we are going to have a challenge in the future about food and energy security. I just want to take this quote that I like from the President of European Commission, Jose Manuel Barroso, about sustainable development. He said, "We want to achieve a better quality of life for all now and in the future. This requires, among other things, safeguarding the Earth's capacity to support life in all its diversity and respecting the limits of planet natural resources. We need to prevent and reduce environmental pollution. We need to promote sustainable production and consumption and strike balance between economic growth and prosperity and the protection of environment at home and globally." But what does it mean? In theory, actually, sustainability is about, it's achieved if tomorrow our well-being is at least the same as it is today, if not higher. But looking at the current situation, as I mentioned in the previous slides, do we have enough productive resources to support the well-being for tomorrow as the same level as today? And if not, then consumption should be declined. But how do we do that? So then, most of my work, I work with the the people. So like I'm from civil society, so I work with the people, like raise awareness and also involve them in policy advocacy, either like have a policy advocacy to the government, or also working together with companies, with businesses in demanding for their products to be greener. And we can see also, looking at all those challenges, we should not be like, we should be positive still, because we have a lot of opportunity to move forward. Like, there's a lot of talk about green economy in the last few years, and I think like this is also like go hand in hand with Islamic Sharia economy. So the shifting of strategy on economy in the global world, if we see the crisis, the financial crisis, and a lot of disaster happening around the globe, then we should be ready to actually shifting. We have no choice. And also like we can go in a different strategy on that. I'm not going to go like in detail, but there's like carbon track, ecosystem track. There's a lot of these things, like a lot of experts actually like developing like how do you actually make the shifting. And also like the new technology is, the new green technology is actually out there, available, and how do you deploy that for people? How do people know, like when they do like consumption, like which one is better, and to have awareness, like to choose product A or product B? Is that like what is the impact to the environment? So like this is like what my colleague and I we're doing. Like we are actually like giving awareness to the people. And also we need like to work together. There's no one-man show here, and we need like actually having engagement, and each role plays very important, like government, the people, civil society, and corporate sector. Media also is it's a very important matter here. And also like governance matters, because like Mariam mentioned, especially in developing world, like where's like policy is not yet set up, so governance is always a challenge, but this is going, we are moving forward for that. I'm very positive on that. And then also like when we're talking about greening the economy or green technology, of course we're talking about incentives. And then we also like talking about the devil. Like we always talk that we are on the right track, but sometimes we fail to actually deal with the devil in detail. So like a lot of details that we missed out. And last but not the least, leadership really matters. So especially in the corporate world, from my experience, it's always the top-down policy. If they want to go greener, it's always the top-down policy. It works better. Whereas like if it's like the employee has initiative, it's taking sometimes. But if the decision is from the top down, from the top management, then it's take on very fast. And my last slide, I think we're going to talk about this in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is ask a couple of questions just to get things moving a little bit. Are people still paying attention? Are you really paying attention? All right, good. Bismillah. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions of you guys, and just and I want you guys, I want everyone in the audience to think about these things as well as I ask them. So the big question is, so what? Like, who cares? Right? A lot of emerging economies and emerging countries have come out of a situation, a post-colonial situation. And in an idealistic perspective, you would think that they would be an early adopter and lead in green technologies and lead in developing sustainable practices. But more often than not, that's not the case, primarily because the consumer does not care. So I wanted to put this out to you guys as, to think about. Mariam, if you could maybe just begin with this. Does the consumer care? And if the consumer doesn't care, does the company still have a responsibility to be more active in their sustainability efforts?
As to the first question, which is, does the consumer care? I think the answer varies very differently. It depends on what part of the world, it depends on what group in what part of the world, depends on individual behavior. I think for the most part there's a growing awareness, but there isn't a widespread, especially in emerging markets, I'll speak about emerging markets, there isn't a widespread demand for massive change, no. Does that change the responsibility of business? I think businesses have an absolute responsibility to think sustainably about every aspect of what they do, be it the environment, be it the communities that they work in, be it the way they treat their labor force, because that's the way you run a good business, that's the way that you have a good future. And in terms of how do you make that sustainable from a business perspective, part of everybody's responsibility, and businesses are not exempt from that, is to make people care by making the links between environmental issues and the things they care about clearer. So maybe for a business like ours, it's cost. You know, if you're dealing with other businesses, if you're speaking with individuals, maybe it's the huge increase in the number of natural disasters and the impact that's had on people's individual lives. I mean, the list goes on and on. So part of what we're all responsible for is making those links and giving people an incentive to care.
Because now I'm going to drill them, if you guys don't mind. So I want to drill in on one of those points that you made. You said make the links. Now, is this responsibility to make the links, is that through, is that a media campaign? Is that, and if you're dealing with B2B, how are the links made so that, that the value is infused in that?
Well, I mean, I think that it's everything, right? All of the above. It depends on what group you're talking about. But when it comes to a B2B, I think the lever is cost, first and foremost. So if you can make the link between doing something this way is more efficient and it will save you money, and by the way, here are the environmental implications of that decision, then I think you have an instant in to talk about a lot of other stuff.
Got it. So, okay, Ralph, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you a question. From the perspective of doing big things, big projects, extraction, dealing with raw materials, are those not just ancient old technologies? Why don't we just transition out of using coal or using concrete? Why are we still stuck in the past of 100 years ago, and why aren't we just innovating brand new technologies that are going to bring us forward into the future?
Some of the technologies are very advanced. Slag cement, for instance. Problem is when you mix aggregates into Portland cement in the ratio of, say, 50 or 70%, the setting times are very long. So we need to get construction companies to understand that the settings will actually be, the hardness levels are much higher, but the setting times are longer. So it may cost you a little bit more to build the condo, because you can't build, say, one floor a day. You may only be able to build, one floor every 2 days. So you can precast, you can do all those things, but at the end of the day, the consumer has to understand that there is an additional cost to sustainable building practices, for instance. So when we've been doing things for hundreds of years, I mean, cement's been around for thousands of years, but when we need to make a fundamental change, it has to be driven down. And I believe that consumers will not be willing to necessarily walk the greener side, but governments need to initiate some type of incentive system, subsidy system, or some type of penalty system. So when you see in Taiwan the waste disposal system, 15 years ago when I lived there, it was a mess. People would throw garbage out their windows. Now, people segregate their garbage. Every single item is segregated. The garbage trucks, different garbage trucks come to pick up different types of waste stream. And it's like a community meeting every evening when the garbage trucks come around. That was government-led, And it led to a change in cultural behavior amongst the population. The same thing in Korea with solar panels. That also was government incentivized. Then they had this huge boom in solar panel installations, building integrated PV. So I believe there is a need for both sides to meet in the middle. Private sector plays a huge role as well. But
so picking up on that, is it possible? Does it make more sense in the case of some of those examples around incentives, from a perspective of a business or an emerging field like some of these things are, where you're thinking about the new additives to concrete, or some of these other incentives that have to sort of that government's going to push up something? Does it make more sense for the government to flood the market with the incentives, or to wait for the people to sort of contextualize the benefits and then support an effort and sort of leading from behind? So where do you think is better for the government, to wait for the market to decide and then support, or to initiate it?
I think a well-led government with good advisory capabilities, you need to provide a carrot and stick approach. I don't believe consumers alone will be able to make the decision on what's right and wrong or good and bad. I think the government is the one that has to formulate policy, and then private companies have to then create the environment to let it work, to make it work, and then consumers will follow suit. I really believe it's stick and carrot, but it has to be led from the top.
Great. So part of that, and this is interesting to think about, is that the old adage of the customer is always right is actually wrong. The customer doesn't always know what the customer wants. You didn't know that you needed an iPhone, now you need it every day. So Nana, I wanted to, with you, like, all of these things require human beings to do something different. For people to actually go out and have those community meetings around the trash and whatnot. So can you talk to me about the power of education, particularly for young people, and what is the role for companies to help provide some of that education at the very low levels?
Right. Can I have like my last slide? The last slide, can you? Okay, so actually, this is like all, like you can see, like this is like bags and, like umbrellas, but they're all made by, like using like waste from packaging material. If you're aware, this is like from consumer goods. And what happened is like a lot of like consumer goods company, actually their packaging is like a lot, then it's creating a lot of waste. So actually like we work with community then trying to reduce the waste, because we were having problem with the waste, then teaching them actually to collect them and then create a new thing. Then this new thing we call fashion, which is fashion from a trash. So it's a philosophy and ethic about environmentalism and innovation. So making like a new product from recycled materials. But how we actually like going into our youth is like we have this new trend as a green lifestyle. So if you actually wearing something that is made by recycled materials, you're very cool. So we are actually creating a new generation that is having awareness that by using this, actually they also like improve the environment by reducing the waste and having like using like instead of new material for their bags or backpacks, using like recycled materials. And also for the people, like we work with a very poor community who's making this, mostly ladies. They realize that actually by collecting the trash and then making a new product, it's extra incomes for them. So actually, their actually like role is producing a new thing, taking care of the trash, but at the same time, we're creating a new green lifestyle for the youth. And right now, this is like the fashion is part of like, a lot of fashion designer also going into these things. They are involving on that, and they're also like trying to use the recycled materials on a lot of their products. So as you know, like fashion designers is always like a trendsetter. So like once we work with them, like, you know, like young generation, they're also like going into that, and they're, you know, like this is like part of the awareness to the youth.
So real quick, Ralph, the reverse supply chain, or maybe I should direct this to you, but the reverse supply chain. So just for you guys to think about, we know a lot about the supply chain, correct, in most instances, but we know very little about the removal chain. So there's an opportunity to develop businesses related to the removal chain. So can you, Mariam, can you just speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think this is a growing area and a huge business opportunity. So again, you know, we're a supply chain management company, if you like, and some of the new projects that we're seeing, and it's led mostly by Western multinationals, is around reverse logistics. So just to give you an example, we work with Nike in Indonesia, and a lot of the work we do is not just distributing shoes to, or sports equipment and apparel to stores, it's getting, you know, defective equipment back, getting unsold stocks back, making sure that they're either recycled or reused or repaired or resold. So there's a whole piece around closed loop logistics that I think is becoming much more important, and there's a tremendous opportunity there. But it's still a fairly nascent field. I think this is something that some of the world's bigger and more forward-looking companies are thinking about, but there are opportunities for everyone.
So one of the things that I want you guys to think about as well is that we know about this framework of reduce, reuse, and recycle, correct? Everyone's very familiar with reduce, reuse, recycle. There's also a framework of refusing. So of consumers refusing to buy goods that don't relate to their values. Now, I wanted to ask you, Nana, did you ever come across people, poor people, that would refuse to buy something because the values that it was made with were not aligned with them?
Well, actually, like if you're talking about poor people in the, you know, like developing countries, like they even like their buying, you know, like capacity is not even like, you know, they don't have choice in terms of that. So actually, like by working with them, you know, like working like actually like the one that I just showed, like, you know. That's actually like part of education also, because like they are reducing our garbage from, you know, stuck somewhere. So actually like by working with them, like, and then they know also like which companies, like this company also actually support, you know, by looking at like their product actually, like, you know, like it's kind of like they see a CSR project that they looking at this as a success story, so they actually support this community to, you know, like bringing this designer to actually improve that.
But would people choose to not buy, for example, palm oil that they knew was not sustainably harvested?
Like for poor community, of course they don't have choice. Like they're not up to there yet, so like they don't have like that. Many choices.
How would you get them to get to the place where they could look at two products that were, one was sustainably harvested and one wasn't? How would you get the communities that you're familiar with to make a better choice?
Well, then we have to like educate them. That's like, you know, like to be aware of like which products is like which company is actually having like sustainable practices and which company is not having sustainable practices. So it's more like awareness raising to them, like, so it's part of the education. But because we don't have yet, I'm talking about Indonesia, we don't have that like labeling, you know, which one is sustainable, which one is not. So like they don't know yet. But we are moving forward towards that. So like I'm hoping, like, you know, in the future they can just recognize by logo or something. Like for organic matters, we already have that. But for in terms of like goods, like your example is palm oil, it's already been used for other products. So like they cannot have any knowledge like where the sustainable palm oil.
So I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to open it up to the floor. Do people have questions? You do. I mean, you never know. Maybe people are just sitting there hanging out, playing on their iPhones or their Samsungs or whatever it is that they do in Malaysia. So Ralph, there's a lot of reasons for companies to shift in their operations and what they're going to do. The big one is obviously regulatory pressure that, you know, you have to do something. In New York City, we banned the use of No. 6 heating oil. because it was creating soot that was creating asthma problems and other air quality issues. Then we cleaned up, we made them clean up number 2 and number 4 heating oil to make it even cleaner when it was burning, and these are for heating homes. Some of these oil companies had to act because we made these regulations. We had it at the local level and at the federal level. We pushed all these things. What is stopping a company, a large company, from just shifting into another market that doesn't have that regulation?
I think, you know, they obviously have companies with, say, utility exposure. The infrastructure and the capex is very heavy, so it's very difficult for them to just displace themselves into another market. But I think there are now tremendous incentives, and I know I talked a lot about carrot and stick at the government level, but I think with social media taking such a strong position these days, we saw the examples of Foxconn with the suicides and the worker protests and fighting in China in the factories, which I believe is affecting some people's perception to iPhone consumption. We had Dell Hell when there was Jeff Jarvis had that huge great attack on Dell because of his bad customer service experience. We had another one which was Nestle and the Kit Kat that came from Sina Mas being attacked by an NGO in Indonesia for conservation issues. Yet there are the good stories as well. So social media is helping. So you've got Puma, who have tremendous things like, you know, the reusable shoebox. Tetra Pak, who do their life cycle analysis throughout their whole supply chain. Nike, who've really cleaned up a lot since their allegations of underage worker in terms of the entire supply chain. So I think social media is perhaps going to play an even greater role in terms of pressure on the companies and consumers to actually accept or promote good behavior.
That's awesome.
And really condemn bad behavior in terms of non-sustainable practices.
Mariam, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, can I just jump in there? I mean, I think that's such a good point, Ralph. And I think, you know, the reality is that today the bulk of consumers are still in the Western world, right? And you can see that social media, increased transparency, more access to information is changing consumer behavior. And I think part of the challenge is to think about how a rising consumer base from emerging markets thinks about these issues. So if we look, I mean, McKinsey recently put out a report saying that by 2030, half of all consumption will take place in emerging markets. That's a radical shift from today. Currently, about 30% of all consumption occurs in emerging markets. So it'll be very interesting to see how, you know, this rising class of consumers in places like China and India and Indonesia use social media and other tools to think through and make purchasing decisions, and whether some of those same trends will follow or not.
That's great. So do we have any, why don't we take some questions? Do we have any microphone people? Oh, we do, great. So let's hear some questions. Maybe we'll take a couple at a time, and then I'll dismiss them and then ask my own question. Mm-hmm. Listen, I'm truly out of my element here in Malaysia, and I'm seeing all my sort of typical American jokes that don't fall quite well here. So please, if afterwards you could throw one of those smelly fruits at me, and I'll get it or something. Sir?
Thank you very much.
Hold on, remember, not a comment, a question.
Sure, thank you very much.
Okay. I'm working with you. I'm working with you.
Whatever you say.
Okay, good.
Whatever you say. Okay, my question is this, that, you know, there's been, the panelists have talked about emerging markets, they've talked about supply chains and so on. I would imagine that when you talk about the global supply chain, for example, the bulk of whatever is in that supply chain is produced by small and medium enterprises. Mm-hmm. Now, when you talk about sustainability, when you talk about the need to go green and so on, that's where I believe attention has also to be paid to small and medium enterprises. One hears about all these big companies going green and so on and so forth. So I wonder whether the panelists have any comment on this. Ralph, for example, talked about the need for government to come in with perhaps a carrot and stick approach to these things. I give you an example. Supermarkets. In Malaysia, for example, some supermarkets, I think many supermarkets, would say On Saturdays, no plastic bags. So if you buy any product from that supermarket, they won't bag it in a plastic bag. But still, I find that many of these supermarkets will say, but if you wish to have a bag, you pay 20 cents for it. But it is still a plastic bag. Why couldn't it be a paper bag or some other bag rather than plastic? So back to my question is, what would be the role of small and medium enterprises in going green?
Great. Let's
the whole global supply chain.
Let's hold on to that. That's a great question, and we're going to take one more, and then you guys can think of your answers to them. The pause in taking more questions is more so that the panelists can think about what on earth they're going to say to answer the question.
All right. I've got a question, but it's going to be a bit on a micro level on consumer behavior and green technology. So, for example, if you look at an eco-friendly bulb, of course, it's going to save you, it's going to last for a longer time. But if you look at the cost, that is at least 10 times the cost of a normal light bulb. So, as a consumer, when you're trying to make that choice, if you don't have that disposable income, regardless of how much awareness you have, you do the math and you say, you know, I can't pay for this right now. So, the question that I'm going to put to you is that, until we reach that level where green technology has reached a scale that would dramatically reduce the price, do you think that we will be able to incentivize the business or even the consumers to change when they don't actually have a real choice?
That's great. That's a great question. Any other question real quick before we answer these? Sir?
Actually, related to that question, why can't companies, when you're looking at sustainable products, which are made from recyclable materials, which are basically grown from nature, why can't companies think creatively, and maybe your comment on that, to actually create sustainable products that are lower cost, than industrial products that are currently put in the market?
Great.
Views.
Great. This is great. So why don't we answer some of these right now? I think the point about the mid-sized businesses, if you will, is a really, really strong one, particularly in the manufacturing sector. I think there's less, so this is really relates to the cost piece. How do they make this shift? They don't have all this extra money laying around that's going to make it viable for them. So does anyone want to pick that up, about the mid-sized manufacturing and other businesses? I mean, okay, I'll just say from the perspective of the work that I do, I work with a consulting firm, and we were looking at this sort of the environmental consulting space, which is a huge business opportunity. And we did identify that there is actually a very specific role. There's actually a business opportunity in providing tools, specific tools, to mid-sized entities, step by step. This is what you do to green your entire operations. Less of a PR, a marketing thing, and much more of very specific. How do you manage your stuff on the floor and your production facilities? How do you do procurement in a green way? How do you ask the right questions? There's a massive opportunity there. There's actually a business opportunity there that I think has yet to be tapped into. Does anyone have any comments about that?
Can I have that? About the plastic, actually, in the supermarket, right? Like we always go shopping, and grocery shopping. So what our experience in Indonesia, this is done by youth. Actually, they have a campaign, what it's called plastic diet. So they have a very enormous campaign using social media on plastic diet, and then they actually create this small bag that you can fold it and then put it in your pocket. Then you can use it when you do grocery shopping. So that's a cool way to do it. Or they use that the one that I showed in the slides, to go grocery shopping. So for them, this is the young generation now. For them, it's not cool if you're using plastic. It's just not cool. Plastic diet, that's what they call their campaign. So it's been very successful in the young generation. So I'm hoping from the young generation, we're creating a new generation that don't have a certain different behavior in terms of consumption, and hopefully that's also influencing on their household, their parents and their other, siblings.
Great. We want to address the sort of the scale question of bringing things to scale and the cost question about.
I'd just like to go back to the question about SMEs and.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, there's try and answer the three in one. Basically, the role of SMEs, giving people a choice, and also I think the last one was about a choice at reasonable cost.
Cost, yeah.
And there was a company in Malaysia, or still is a company called Eco-Futures, which was trying to create a range of packaging products from palm oil empty fruit bunch waste. So empty fruit bunch is the end of the bunch that comes out of the palm oil mill. After you steam the fruit bunch, the fruit is taken off, and then you get an empty fruit bunch, which is effectively a waste product. So they were taking this very fibrous product, mulching it up or shredding it and pressing it to get the moisture out and the oil out, and then turning it into a molded pulp product. The cost was a little bit higher. The consumers wanted something which looked a little bit nicer. The companies at least wanted something you could print on. There was a solution there that there wasn't quite the infrastructure to cope with it, or the demand side to cope with what the company was producing. So they hit on very hard times. The other example is IUT in Singapore, which was collecting food waste from restaurants and hawker centers. Again, they have gone into liquidation now and been bought out by another company. But again, there wasn't quite the appetite from the consumers or the supply chain to create this value in the waste product. And it was, again, another SME that had failed. And I think it does go back a little bit to, the carrot and stick approach, and also then teaching consumers about what is a sustainable practice. So 2 examples of companies that tried and really didn't succeed, simply because the entire value chain wasn't dealt with. It was just pushing the market as a commercial proposition.
That's interesting.
And if I can just add to that, so I think Raf is absolutely right. There is a hugely important role to government policy, and also a hugely important role to how financing for green products and services is done, right? So just a couple of examples that come to mind, because I think you were talking about compact fluorescent lights. They're more expensive, or LED lights, they're more expensive, but the idea is, in theory, over the long term, you save money, and this is a lot of the theory behind a lot of green products, whether it's solar panels, etc., etc. And so I think maybe part of the question, or part of what we need to think about, is not just, well, if I have 2 products and one is more expensive and one is less expensive, which one am I going to buy? Because I think it's unreasonable to expect people to always choose the more expensive product just because it's more sustainable, because not everybody can afford to make that choice, as you rightly pointed out. So maybe the question is, how can you change how you finance these products so that the upfront costs are similar, but the longer-term costs are sort of diffused over time? So I heard the CEO of Nissan Renault speak a few years ago about electric cars and how he was going to get, the marketing strategy for bringing electric cars to market. And their idea was electric cars should save you money over a 5-year period. However, the upfront cost is more expensive. So what they did was they introduced electric cars. The cost was the same for a similar non-electric car, but then you would lease. They had a leasing model, so you would lease the battery over a period of 5 years, and you could see very directly that your fuel costs over the cost of a year were going to be less than the cost of a battery for that year. And so I think it's things like that that play a very important role, but that in many cases is strongly linked with government policy. So, solar adoption, etc. It's often governments that bear the brunt of thinking through those financing arrangements and providing the incentives that allow people to make these choices.
I think connected to that issue and to your question, and also to the gentleman over here in New York City, you can look at New Jersey, which is the state right across the Hudson River in New York. They, when New Jersey incentivized solar and just dumped tons of money into the solar industry. So all of these solar companies, solar panel companies, and the connecting folks sprung up, and all of a sudden you saw this flourish of activity. The minute that the incentives dried up, so did the industry. It sort of like dissipated. In New York, they waited and did little incentives in different places, but they said these areas are sort of solar empowerment zones, these areas where they're the best suited for solar. So then you started to have a lot of R&D money going into those areas to say, how can we best use solar in this type of environment with these constraints? And given the constraints, then if there's more constraints, I think you'll start to see more R&D money flooded in, and then that helps make it the cost balance out a little bit in some instances, because now you have now there's there's a lot of VC money related to clean tech, and so it's coming to areas where there's sort of the government saying we're interested, but we're not going to dive in completely. So as you can see, I have an opinion here. I feel like I think the government needs to stay a little bit away in some instances, so to create that environment, because I don't think the R&D is going to come directly from the government. But I agree, there has to be some partnership. In terms of in some instances with the light bulbs, because I like that example, some big companies, the big ones, I argue they should just give them away, right? And then that's where, they should just literally flood communities with the CFLs, because overall, the energy consumption is going to go down. And I think that's going to relate directly. They can, that's part of their overall, that could be part of a relationship that they have with the government that they're around, is, hey, we gave away 30,000 bulbs this year. That's a different kind of conversation. Are there other questions?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry,
if you don't
please.
mind, Ibrahim, just on
You
that.
can disagree with me and yell at me.
No, I don't.
Right
Just on that front. And to answer your question about why don't we have more sustainable businesses and so on, I think some of the most interesting work being done in this space is being done by social entrepreneurs. And your example of the light bulb just reminds me of another person I heard speak again a couple of years ago. And he started an initiative which is very interesting. So what he does is he sells carbon emissions on the global carbon market to finance free light bulb projects. So let me explain how this works. He'll go to a city, a big urban center, and he will create a partnership with the municipal government, and in some cases the federal government, and say, look, I will give you a light bulb for every house and every business for free if in turn you set up a body that will certify that by everybody switching their light bulbs, we've saved X amount of emissions, and I will take those emissions and then sell them on the global carbon market, and I will pay for the cost of the light bulb. So a really innovative way. For the city, you get free light bulbs for everybody. For the NGO, or it's not really an NGO, it's a social enterprise. It's fully self-financing. They don't get money from anybody. And everybody gets a new light bulb. So that isn't a traditional type of business, but I think there's a new generation of social entrepreneurs that are thinking about these issues in very innovative ways.
That's beautiful. That's awesome.
Yeah.
We don't have that much time. I do want to maybe we can get maybe one or two more questions in. How are we doing on time? We're almost done. Oh, we're good. Okay. So do we have any other questions, sir?
Yeah. Hi. My name is Amir. I represent the Malaysian palm oil industry. My question is actually addressed to Ibrahim and also Ralph Dixon. I'm asking, why is the palm oil industry labeled as unsustainable? Because it's heavily attacked by Western governments and environmental NGOs, when in fact there's so many studies proving that it's actually a very sustainable industry, in the fact that it can produce 5 to 10 times more in terms of commodities than Western counterparts, right? Rapeseed, canola, soybean, and then it is also a renewable and environmental resource. It's a carbon sink in of itself. All parts of the oil palm itself is actually utilized, from the fiber to the fronds and the fresh fruit bunch. And then the industry itself, many smallholders are actually involved, and it has elevated hundreds of thousands of farmers out of poverty, and is not even heavily subsidized by the government, as opposed to, say, France or the US does. So just to repeat my question, why is the palm oil industry labeled as unsustainable?
Ralph, do you want to? I'll respond as well, but you want to begin?
Yeah, I think you've hit on a very raw and sensitive nerve. I think there's so many lobby groups and political interest groups. The Nutella tax in France, the soy lobby about 10, 15 years ago in the US, which campaigned against palm oil, labeling it as unhealthy, highly saturated. In fact, it's a very balanced type of vegetable oil. The other thing that they always fail to talk about is the output per hectare, 6 tons, you can get up to 60 tons of CPO per hectare, as you know, per year of crude palm oil. And that compares to something like, 1 or 2 tons of soy or peanut oil or sunflower rapeseed oil. So the other thing is, as you say, carbon sink value. The palm oil tree itself with the fronds and the branches have tremendous carbon sink value. That's why biomass from palm oil is treated as a carbon neutral. So the methodology under the biomass methodology in the clean development mechanism states that biomass from palm oil is a carbon neutral biomass because, as you say, the carbon sink value is there. I think that Malaysia and Indonesia have to fight back. It has to be a very rational, logical. We saw responses last week from MPOB and MPOC, the Malaysian Palm Oil Council and Board, which listed out, and RSPO in fact made a statement as well against the 400% increase in the tax in France. Those were very rational, logical explanations. I think what needs to be done is that we have to go through the supply chain. So Unilever have to come in and support us. Procter & Gamble, all the major users of palm oil, those suppliers from IOI, KLK, Sime Darby, Felder, we have to educate them and get their buy-in. Then I think things can change because they will feed down to the consumer. So Unilever supply to Marks & Spencer's, Tesco, Casino. Casino has been particularly active in France. Against palm oil, but they've been roped in by the NGOs. So what needs to be happening is a far more proactive stance in Malaysia with the whole supply chain. And that doesn't just mean food and edible oil consumers. It has to be also on the oleochemicals as well. So all the way through the supply chain, right down to refineries, and then finally through to the Procter & Gamble's and Unilevers and Nestle's, etc. of this world. Then I think you can get that very, very coherent and very logical response at all levels, which will then filter down to the consumers in France, in UK. And then this negative publicity can be basically dispersed, and you can basically make those lobby groups look having very, very much lack of credibility.
I think, thank you, that was excellent. From my perspective, I think the primary focus has been on the emissions. I think from the burning of crops, and also the rotation of crops, or the perceived lack of rotation, the monocultural aspects of it, which has the perception of being something that is detrimental to the natural environment. I think that these are the things that we've understood as being the primary problems. The other concern is a much larger. Is a hit on the chemicals industry, right? There's a perception that if you start to focus on, if you want less toxic products out there, how do you do that? You have to focus on all the inputs that go into that industry. And that from the people that I'm around, that has been one of the ways, well, where do they get these additives from? And frankly, as you said, there's a lot of misinformation and lack of understanding about how palm oil is produced and all of the different aspects of it. I think there's a product there's a company that's just started up in California, but they're starting to rev up production. They want to basically take reuse grease and start to sell it as an additive into the chemical industry, into the cosmetic industry, to sort of intervene and sort of as an intervention on palm oil. And so I know that they're also involved in sort of creating a wedge between our understanding in the West of the reality of palm oil, because there's a business opportunity if you create misinformation. So these are some of the things that I think come into play.
Add that? I think also in the palm oil, the unsustainability, like why is it being attacked of that? It's because of, like in the case of Indonesia, it's because of land use change. That's why is it being attacked as unsustainable? Because if I follow a little bit about RSPO, the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, that the palm oil plantation is not supposed to be done in high conservation value forests, which is a lot of practices is still doing that. So that way, like you are actually it's a threat to the biodiversity, and that's why it is being attacked most of the time now, being as a product of unsustainable. So like if RSPO is very active on this, trying to make palm oil as a sustainable product. So like I think their guidelines is pretty tough. So if the palm oil plantation and industries follow that, actually I think like they are going towards the sustainability of it. Versus, just planting as business as usual.
Great.
If I can just make a quick point. I mean, I'd like to just throw this to you, but I always feel that RSPO, why should there be a premium for an RSPO certified plantation and mill? Why don't we then incentivize people to buy RSPO certified oil? Give a discount, transfer your subsidies on fossil fuels to RSPO, CPO. Then it's like a lost leader. You get people to buy the right thing. You get people to behave in the right way. You clean up the supply chain, but you don't do it by charging people a premium, which they're not going to pay. You can see the uptake of RSPO oil has been very slow. So provide an incentive to them and let money do the work.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. That's a good question. Any other quick questions before we wrap up? One last one here in the back.
Thanks, Ibrahim. Firstly, I love the Green Dean, so I wish I brought my copy with me for you to autograph. I'll suck up first. Question to the panel. My question is actually about standards and certification. In your respective industries, do you foresee a formalized mechanism of standards, third-party certification similar to RSPO, FSC for timber, that can substantiate claims of sustainability?
This is a great question, and you get about 30 seconds. This is your talking point moment.
Oh, are you pointing at me? Sorry, Ibrahim.
All of you.
I wasn't sure. I mean, in our industry, we would, the certification process is still sort of slow. So there's ISO 14001, which is commonly used. There's a lot of discussion amongst industry leaders about how you account for carbon at the consignment level, and there is an attempt through the auspices of the World Economic Forum for these industry leaders to get together with some of our leading customers to actually come to an agreement around how you do the basic accounting, because that's part of the problem, right? That there are all of these protocols around accounting for greenhouse gas emissions, but they are still fairly high level. So that's an ongoing discussion.
Great.
Just a few. There's GRI. I mean, I'm not talking about the accreditations that Mariam is talking about, but GRI for your entire sustainability reporting, so Global Reporting Initiative, the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, integrated reporting, which may or may not come to these markets, Carbon Disclosure Project. These are all quite worthwhile. And then you've got things like the Ibrahim Index in Africa, which is 88 indicators which measure levels of corporate governance. So there are actually they're not truly certifications or accreditations, but they're ways, indices and measures of sustainability in a more broader sense.
Great.
Well, I'm a believer that certification and accreditation is needed because we are in a change of our thinking system and our paradigm. Once we practice all sustainable is in a sustainable way, then we don't need that anymore. Why we need it now? Because our practice is business as usual. We're not in a sustainable world. That's why we need this certification and accreditation to help us to move forward on that direction.
So I'm gonna say a brief moment, but let's just give them a round of applause right now, please. Let's give them actually a round of applause, please. Okay. I really appreciate this conversation. I hope you did as well. I learned a great deal. I think from the Islamic perspective, I do want to make sure that we point out one of the reasons why I'm very motivated and passionate about this topic and about the way that they come together. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was a trader. He was active in business. He was also someone who left every person he encountered with better than he found them. And as Muslims, that is our charge. How do we leave the world better than we found it? That is the essence of being being the Khalifa, is that we have inherited this planet from the people that have come before us, and we have to leave it better than we come after. My ancestors are Native American. My grandmother was born on a reservation in upstate New York. And part of the ethic there is that we have to think 7 generations ahead. 7 generations ahead of us. So these decisions that we're talking about aren't decisions about now. They're about the far off into the future. And one of the things that I want to point out is that everything in the universe you are going to be held accountable for. And when you destroy something, you will be held accountable for it. When you plant something, you will be held accountable for that. When you pray in the grass and in the trees out in the open, that area will speak on your behalf on the day of judgment. And everything in the universe has a dhikr to Allah. So when you destroy things in the natural world, you destroy something that is praising God at that moment. And as people of faith, we have to remember that we have to infuse our values into our work. And you don't have to be outwardly Muslim or this is a Muslim business. All you have to do is live by your example. And I think that these 3 people they do this by their example. And hopefully, inshallah, we'll all do the same. So thank you very much. And anything that we said that was good, obviously came from Allah. And anything that we said that was wrong or false, that comes from us. Thank you. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you very much to our distinguished speakers, as well as to our able moderator, Brother Ibrahim. And again, to record this moment, we'd like to invite all the speakers and the moderator for a group photo session. All right, we're going to have one for the album, yes.